So I spent my first night away from home in a flop house. Next morning, I went down to the railroad, and from then on, I stayed at the Sterling Hotel.
Mm-hmm.
Bobby done real good. He picked the corn, so forth and so on. In fact, my folks got kind of fond of him. He was a card, and
Mm-hmm.
my dad took a liking to him. Anyway, that was the fall of 41.
Mm-hmm.
And
So this was This was in 41, but the summer, the end
the
of summer.
fall.
Gotcha, fall.
And the army the military was grabbing people right and left. So in 6 months' time, I went up the seniority halfway because there were so many going to the army. And the railroad was unionized and had
You're going up the ladder in the
Union Pacific.
in the trains. Okay,
right.
in the railroad.
Right. And they were unionized, so we had to belong to a union. And the union recognized seniority. So I wasn't a laborer, but just a few.
Yeah, I was going to say, if this is the fall of 41 in December,
Pearl
not
Harbor.
much later. Yeah.
Pearl Harbor, right. And so they had job bidding, and they had a job called a scrap sorter.
Mm-hmm.
Scrap sorter. All you had to know was the difference between copper and brass and iron and cast iron, and they gathered up all of this refuse from the entire system from Chicago and brought it to Cheyenne and dumped it in huge piles. And we would have to go through and say, this is cast iron goes here and brass goes here. And we spent most of our time figuring out what we were going to do that night, whether we were going to go roller skating or what we were going to do. But anyway, it paid 51 cents an hour. So that was 43 to 51 would be 8 cents an hour more. But 8 cents an hour was 8 cents an hour in those days. And so I continued to work for the railroad. My father continued to improve. He had pancreatic cancer in advanced stages. And
And they knew that back then?
I took him to the doctor. My mother and I took him to the doctor in Cheyenne. Again, that state line was there. And they evaluated him. And they come out and told me, your dad is dying of pancreatic cancer. There's nothing we can do for him, but we can make him comfortable. But the doctor knew my dad, and he told me, Harold, if you take your dad to, this is during the Depression was still around. If you take your dad to Colorado and take him down to Greeley to the clinic, the county will pay his care. So I took my dad home that night, and the next day I couldn't drive the pickup because my dad had filled it full of water and didn't drain it. And zero temperature froze up and busted the block. So there I was afoot. And I went and got a neighbor to take my mother and I down to Greeley. And they had given me a letter to the doctors at Greeley. I told my mother, I'm not going to give this to them. I'm going to let them tell me what's wrong with my dad. So we got down to Greeley and they took him back to the examining room and kept him for a half hour or so. And here they come, all solemn-faced, and told my mother and I that my dad was dying of pancreatic cancer in advanced stages, and there was nothing they could do, but they would put him in the clinic and keep him comfortable till he passed away. Sort of like hospice today. And so we left him there at the clinic and took my mother over to a friend, and I had to go home then and do the chores and take care of everything. And they kept him down there for 6 weeks. And by the 6 weeks was up, he was making such a pain. There's nothing wrong with me. There's nothing wrong with me. I don't know why I'm here.
And when was this? Was this the fall?
This was the fall of
41?
41, yeah.
Yeah.
And so we took him home, and they gave him an allotment of medicine, and he took that, and when that was gone, he didn't take anything.
Mm-hmm.
The doctors tell me that cancer can cut off its own blood supply, in effect cure yourself. And that was apparently his condition, because he was yellow as a pumpkin.
Oh, you're fine. Yeah.
But so anyway, that was before. So I was working for the railroad. Now you want to hear a story about the railroad?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. After I got promoted from scrap sorter, I bid in a job called a gang leader. And it's just what
Sounds rough.
just what it says, gang leader. And so they made me in charge of the lumber yard, which was for the whole system. And they gave me a bunch of 50 and 60-year-old men that had been laborers all their life, and they knew every trick in the book, how to not work, how to hide out, and so I tried my best to get them
I
to
think
work.
that ever changed. Sorry.
And they all, I did a lot of the work myself just to keep things going. And finally, I got an order to ship a boxcar load of wood shingles to Evanston, Wyoming. And I got the guys and I said, "Now, I've had it with you guys. If you won't load this car of shingles, I'm going to write you up." So they got in and they loaded the shingles. And they passed them and threw them in the car and busted half the bundles. When the car got to Evanston, they sent a letter back, and I was on the carpet. They called me in and they said, "We don't know what you want to do, but you better do something because you're not a leader of men." So I bid in the stores helper, which was a title of a person that reported to the storekeeper. And I had the responsibility of taking care of all of the oil and greases in the Cheyenne yard. And the Cheyenne yard is 5 miles long and a half mile wide. And I had to be sure that the shop fuel oil was here and the grease was there, and when they went to do something, and when they got a 12,000 gallon tank of diesel fuel, I had to see to it that it was dumped into the underground and all that. It was a responsible job, and it was cold. It was 40 below zero, night after night in Cheyenne. But anyway, that was a job I could do myself, so I done quite well with that. And as I recall, we were working a 44-hour week, if I'm not mistaken. I think we had to work a half a day on Saturday. Maybe not. But anyway, come the weekend, I'm 19 now, got my own car, and burning the candle at both ends, and going to a dance Saturday night, and going roller skating Sunday night, doing something all through the week. And I was going with a girl down to Colorado, among others. And so this weekend, there was just overlapping activities. I was busy all weekend, never got any rest. Sunday night, got to bed about 1 o'clock. And so when the landlady woke me up to go to work, so I didn't go to work. And the storekeeper, instead of waiting till I showed up, he took a laborer to do my job. The laborer didn't know how to do it. And the Streamliners was the pride and joy of the Union Pacific.
Mm-hmm.
Here comes the Streamliner in from Los Angeles. And, of course, it had to be refueled. So it was sitting over in the passenger yard, and the guy that was going to refuel it connected up the hose and turned it on, and there had a glass thing in the locomotive that could see what was going on, and he saw this black, and he cut it off. What the laborer had done, he'd gone over in the passenger yard and dumped 12,000 gallons of shop fuel oil into the diesel fuel tank. And if he had done what he was supposed to have done, he would have known. But anyway, so now they had to get rid of that tank car, get a switch engine over there and get it away. And the car that he should have emptied was still out in the train in the freight yard. He had to go and bust up that train, get that car out, and get it over to the passenger yard. Now they couldn't use the underground facilities to fuel the train, so they had to get a steam pump to pump the fuel into the train. The train left Cheyenne about 4 hours late. When I got woke up, I went to work, found out what had happened, and I resigned right there.
I'm guessing that making the train late is a serious offense.
Right, especially the Streamliners. It's the pride and joy of the railroad.
All because you didn't show up to work.
You were going to tell me about you teaching your mom to drive.
Yes.
Okay. That was back when I was doing the farming, and as I say, we didn't have the proper equipment. So we had a fair crop of pinto beans, and you put them just like in a garden. You put a row of them in, and then the bean puller goes through and cuts the roots, and the beans dry up, and you come through and pile them into a pile. Now you got to take the pile of beans and stack them to where a thrash machine can come in and thrash them. So my dad wasn't able to do anything, and so we had a two-wheeled cart that my dad had made. That was our wagon. So I tied that behind the tractor, and I'd pull it 100 feet or so, and then I'd gather up all the piles of beans, and then I'd have to go and get the tractor and move it again, and so forth. So when I went to lunch, I asked my mother, "Do you think you could learn how to drive the car?" Well, she was willing to try anything. So she said, yeah. I said, okay. So after we went back out, I disconnected the tractor from the wagon and attached it to the pickup. And I got the pickup, and I told her, now, you got two controls, the clutch and the gas. I said, when you let the clutch out, easy. When you feel the motor pulling, you give it a little gas, and you move ahead until you're ready to stop, and then you reverse the process. So I got out and got the beans all piled on the wagon and give her the signal to pull ahead. She floorboarded that thing, let out on the clutch and threw dirt for 100 feet, unloaded all the beans, just, you can just see her. Anyway, when she let up on the gas, of course, then the car died, and she got out and walked to the house. That was her first and last.
She never drove again?
Never drove again.
I don't know that she really drove once.
Crazy.
Yeah, my mother was willing to try anything once.
So after the train,
So you quit? Yeah, you quit Union Pacific.
I quit right in the middle, and I thought that would cancel my employment. But years later, when I come back from the Navy, I went to the Union Pacific Railroad, and they hired me right on the spot and sent me to Kansas City.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I ended up down here, because I was going to work on the caboose, engine, tower, radio equipment, all new.
Right.
And but then
Mike keeps getting in the way.
talk with man.
No problem.
But then when I reported to work, they said, you go downtown, and they gave me several stores. You go downtown, buy you a bedroll, and report with your bedroll, and you're going to a work train in western Kansas. That was after Rita and I were married. And I thought, that's not a very good occupation for a newlywed. So I went to lunch and never come back. So they're still looking for me.
Oh, I've had a few of those.
70 years later. So tell them about joining the Marines.
Oh, okay. After I quit the railroad, I came down to Missouri to see Merritt Crozier, Rita's brother. And on the way back, I stopped at Grand Island, Nebraska to see my sister. And my brother-in-law, which I liked very much, he talked me into staying there with them and going to work for the Corn Husk Ordnance Plant. So I went out to the Corn Husk Ordnance Plant. That's the story of its own. And I was the only teenager, and the rest of them were all farmers, middle-aged or above. And we went out and we were tearing down fences. There was farms that had been active farms for 100 years. And we were out there tearing down the houses and barns and fences, everything. And the first night, the boss said, Harold, could you stay and help me? And I said, sure. You'd just been hired too. And he couldn't read or write. He was the boss, but he couldn't read or write. So I had to make out all the timesheets and so forth, so on. Later, I went over to his place and wrote some letters for him. And he told me, he said, you don't belong with these farmers. He said, you got an education. He thought, all I had was a high school education. But anyway, he said, you can do a better job. So I'm going to see if I can find a better job for you. So they called me in and promoted me from laborer to a lab technician. And I worked in the soil lab. And
I'm sorry, soil lab. I don't know what's the soil lab?
well, where you're on a construction, you've got to evaluate whether the soil will compact or not.
Okay, that's what
Yeah.
I didn't know if it was a lab that did stuff with soil, but
Yeah, that's right. And
wasn't going to assume anything.
oil, we had to test all of the oils and so forth that was used on the project. We got in a 12,000 gallon tank of tar for tarring the roads. And what you did, you heated the thing and then you tested when it would flash. And this thing was like gasoline. I mean, you light a match over here, and so we wrote a report that this should be rejected. But the powers to be said, no, we'll use it. So they had a brand new Barbara Green paving machine, and it burned up. So that was the end of that. But anyway,
So now we're roughly around, December of 41. So can you tell us a little bit about, I mean, we have situations we remember like where we were in 9/11, but can you tell us where you were when Pearl Harbor happened and what was going through you and your emotions and all that?
Pearl Harbor happened on a Sunday, of course. And I had gone down, my home was still my home. My folks didn't kick me out. I could come and go. And so my brother come down from Cheyenne, my brother Richard, with a couple of his friends, and we went duck hunting down the reservoir. And when we went back to the car, had the radio on, and they told about Pearl Harbor. And that's the first time I'd heard about
So
Pearl
you're in the
Harbor.
car?
Yeah.
And what day was this that you heard about it?
December 7th.
Oh, okay.
Sunday.
I didn't know how long it took news to travel back then. So
Oh, radio travels pretty fast.
Yeah. And so what were the next couple of days like? Was everybody just up in a frenzy and ready to go, or did it take you a while?
Oh, yes. I was working at the railroad, so a lot of the guys quit their jobs and went down and enlisted and so forth and so on. It was a time of trade.
I mean, we were talking days or weeks, or was it months, or?
Oh,
I mean, was it like the next day?
well, Monday was when everyone enlisted.
So it was like just the next day go.
Yeah, right.
Wow.
And that was why promotions come through so fast, was because
That's how he moved up the chain so fast.
And why do you think everyone enlisted? Was it patriotism? Were they just angry, or?
well, they were angry with the Japanese. We hadn't done anything to them. We didn't know what we'd done to them anyway.
And at that point, Japanese wasn't really in the war at all. That wasn't on your radar. Wasn't on America's radar.
Well, I think we were
People's radar?
blockading him at the time.
Was that?
Were we blockading him at the time? Japan?
We had given them some pretty harsh conditions to meet. They either had to do this, this, and this, or go to war. We pretty well twisted their arm until they didn't have much choice.
Yeah.
And
Also, they could reach us. We couldn't reach anybody else, right?
Right. Admiral Nimitz poked fun at the Japanese high command. He said they were a bunch of idiots. They could have really hurt us at Pearl Harbor, and they could have come to the West Coast. There was nothing to stop them especially after they sunk all of our battleships. And when they invaded Pearl Harbor, they had special targets like the battle wagons and so forth. Number one, they shouldn't have attacked it until they knew that the carriers were there. And the carriers were out. We only had two. And so they didn't get our carriers, and they left the tank farm up above Pearl Harbor. There was probably a quarter mile of tanks full of various fuels and stuff, and they never touched them. If they had destroyed them, it would have been a real blow. I was in on their first real invasion to stop them. In other words, from 41 on, just almost weekly, the Japanese had another victory. They took the Philippines, and they took Malaysia and Singapore, and everybody then did the same thing they're doing now. They looked at the last war, and if it's fought like it in the last war, we should put a fortification here.
Oh, that's a common mistake that we seem to make over and over and over again.
And over and over and over again. Trying to, and the next war is going to be a little different.
So everybody the next day enlisted, or most people enlisting to the Navy, or was it a mix of everyone? Everyone's going to the Army. Obviously, you went to the Navy, correct?
Well, I joined the Marines.
Oh, okay. Sorry. My bad. That's right.
It's
But
funny
go
because
ahead.
he joined the Marines.
Yes.
Yeah, well, I'd been dating a girl in Denver, and her brother and I got to be good friends, and we were both the same age and faced the same problems, and we talked a little bit about the military, and we decided that the Marines was the glamorous. So we were going to join the Marines.
And did you do it Monday? Was it the next day?
Monday morning, we went to the Federal Building, and of course, they were all right there in a row, the Marines, the Navy, the Army. And
I'm guessing there were lines as well. Wasn't a slow time, I'm assuming.
no. and so we went in and made application to join the Navy, and they examined us and prodded us, and they told me, we'll make a man out of you.
Yeah.
We'll make a Marine out of you. I couldn't even shin myself. So, of course, we were effective. We were Marines. We'd made application. So that was their obligation to buy lunch. So they give us meal tickets to go up to the corner cafe and have dinner, lunch. So that was a mistake. We talked it over. We decided that might not be the smartest thing to do. So when we went back, we went right by the Marine. They were going to swear us in at 2 o'clock.
Mm-hmm.
Went right by the Marines and went in the Navy. And again, they saw that there was 2 of us. They brought 2 applications out. You've heard this story. You want it again?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Okay. And so the petty officer, whoever this was, brought out 2 applications, and we sat down and filled them out. And it asked for occupation.
Mm-hmm.
Well, at 19, would you say that I was a what? Farmer?
Yeah.
What? You know. So when I was working for the railroad, Bill Lyons, my brother-in-law, who was married to my favorite sister, he took a radio course, correspondence course.
Mm-hmm.
You paid each lesson, and he talked me into taking a course on radio theory and so forth. So when they asked for my occupation, I just put down R-A-D-I, radio. Sent it in, and the guy came out and said, "Which one of you are Hewitt?" And then I confessed, and he said, "What do you mean here by radio?" I didn't realize the significance of that question. The Navy was desperate for radio men, radio technicians. And I told him, well, I'd taken a correspondence course in radio theory. And he said, well, do you want to take the Eddy test? Never heard of it, Eddy test. I looked perplexed, I guess, and he said, well, if you take the Eddy test, you'll be a petty officer. Well, I didn't know what a petty officer was. Finally, he said, well, you'll make more money. And I said, I'll take it. So I took the Eddy test on a Friday, and it was a 2.5-hour timed test, 70 questions, 10 questions on 7 different subjects. And I answered as many of them as I knew how to answer. And I didn't guess it, I didn't deliberately give them the wrong answer. So they said, can you get your parents' consent? I was 20 years old, but I had to get my parents' consent.
That was where I needed it.
And
That was where you needed the parents' consent. I knew it was somewhere.
Gotcha.
so anyway, I was staying in the Sterling Hotel.
So at 19,
Yeah.
you needed
To
your
join
parents.
to join the
At
military.
19, yeah.
So you never joined the Marines. You just got a free lunch from the Marines.
I got a free lunch from the Marines.
Well,
So you-
they think he joined.
They think you
They're still
joined.
waiting for me. And
So
there is- there
Union
is that
Pacific is looking for him, and the Marines are looking for him.
He's AWOL from the Marines.
Such thing as a free lunch, there is.
so I went over to my hotel and changed clothes and cleaned up and drove 120 miles
Mm-hmm.
to Cheyenne, to Carpenter. And I got there, and my older brother, Paul, was there. And he saw me drive in. He came out to the car, and he said, I hear you joined the Navy. I said, how did you know? Because the Navy had told me that they would let me know whether I passed the test or not before they would proceed with the enrollment. If I didn't pass the test, I could go back home and live it up for a week or two before I get drafted. Anyway, he said, well, the folks got a telegram from the Navy asking their permission, and they said if you wanted to join the Navy, it was all right with them. So I was in the Navy whether I liked it or not. However, fortunately, when I got back to my hotel on Monday, there was a telegram there from the University of Illinois, saying if this man is over 21, rate him radio tech second class. If he's under 21, I don't know what the difference would be, but anyway, if he's under 21, rate him radio tech third class. So I went in the Navy as a third class radio tech, the same as a buck sergeant in the Army. So that was a good step up. And I didn't realize the Navy was buying ships. They couldn't build them that fast.
Right.
So if they found a ship that was fulfill a need, they would purchase it, and then they had to put the crew on it. And radio techs were just impossible. And so they were rushing them through. And so I told Melissa, they told us to report back on a Thursday or something like that. Went back, and here was this room full of men, hundreds. And they said, now we're going to call out your names, and when we call out your name, you move up the hall to room so-and-so, and there they'll tell you where to go and what to do. So they started calling it A, B, and C. Poor guys that had a Z, they were always in trouble. Anyway, when they got to H, they jumped over me. Didn't call my name. They kept on calling until the room was vacant except for 3 guys, myself and 2 other guys. And we soon discovered that we were radio techs.
Right.
At least in name only, not in ability. And so all those men that had been recruited went to Camp Farragut, Idaho. And this is in September, where it's pretty cold. They went to boot camp. So I never went to boot camp. I went right directly to radio school at Treasure Island for the required 3 weeks. And then they shipped me to Oklahoma A&M, down to Stillwater, Oklahoma. And I went through 3 months of, I'd say, intensive training.
Physical training or?
No, technical
Tech training. Okay.
Yeah, we had physical training too, but that wasn't the important thing. Your brain was more important than your muscle. And they didn't mess around. I think the average was 85. If you didn't maintain an 85 average for a month, you was sent down to New Orleans. And so a good third of our class flunked out in 3 months' time. And at the end of 3 months, if we were still viable, then we went back to Treasure Island for 6 more months. And
Where is Treasure Island?
what?
Yeah, where was Treasure Island?
Treasure Island is in the middle of San Francisco Bay. In 1939, the United States had 2 world fairs, one in New York and one in San Francisco. Treasure Island is an artificial island.
Is that, what's that prison?
It's right next to Alcatraz.
It's right next to Alcatraz.
Right. Each day we could look over to Alcatraz. When we first got there, it was also the terminal for the Pan American Clipper. Several times I watched them come in and land. And so then we heard about radar. Radar. That was the top secret. The United States was way behind. We made an arrangement with England. England was way ahead of us on radar. And they agreed to let us use their patents and manufacturing processes and all that. And we would, while we were using theirs, we would experiment and advance and hopefully come up with better and bigger radar. So when we got to radar, then our doom was sealed. We couldn't be flunked out after we got into radar.
The joke I always heard with radar was that 8 countries had developed radar at the same time, but each of the 8 thought they were the only one.
Yeah.
So when they always talk about radar, there's always who invented it. Well, this person in this country, this person in this country, and and they all thought it was top secret, and they were the only ones that had it.
Right. The SG radar had a klystron, which was a very sophisticated vacuum tube. And when we studied that, we found out that it was invented by the Japanese in 1922, the year I was born. But they didn't know how to get the energy out of it. And we had developed a method of the klystron you could fire it and it would send out a pulse. And it was powerful enough that the pulse would go out and hit a ship or something and bounce back. And that was what you were looking for. And anyway, once we got into radar, then we were secure. We couldn't be flunked out.
How long from signing up from that Monday until you're on a ship ready to go? I mean, obviously 3 months and then the 3-week training and stuff along those lines.
Sounds like a while.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, I was in September 9th, 42, and I celebrated my 21st birthday at...
So you went in on September in 42, so it was 9 months of training, or that's when you went into training?
That's when
No.
It was 9 months of training.
Yeah, no, just 3. We had to go from the recruiting office to San Francisco strictly to get our uniforms and to our inoculations and to be observed, see whether we had chronic diseases. And as soon as that 21 days was up, that's when we were kicked loose to go to school.
Gotcha.
So it was standard law or procedure that everyone that joined the Navy went to boot camp, and from boot camp they went home for a month leave. Well, we didn't do that. We went to Treasure Island and went from there right into school, and so I didn't get any leave of any kind until December of 43. Good story. I was assigned to a APA. You've all seen the picture of it. And the comm officer was in his 40s. He seemed like a grandpa figure to me. And he called me son all the time. And so we were at San Diego getting ready to go to the Marshall Islands. And he called me and said, "Go put your dress blues on." So I went down and got my dress blues on, went up, and he said, "Come with me." So I followed him. He goes up to the captain's cabin. Everyone stayed 25 feet away from the captain's cabin. And he goes up and hollers, "George!" He was the captain's private lawyer. And He says, this boy here has never been home since he's been in the Navy, and now he's going into danger, and I think he should go home and see his folks before he goes. So the captain turned to me and said, well, what do you think? And I said, well, I'd certainly like to go, naturally. And so they gave me 8 days leave out of a crew of 670 men. I was the only one aboard ship that got 8 days leave.
Mm-hmm.
The rest of them got 4 days starboard and 4 days port. So, long story. I had to ride a bus from San Diego to Cheyenne.
Oh.
And my sisters, they all planned activities and wanted me to do this and wanted me to do that and had me going and coming.
Mm-hmm.
And
8 days. By the time he got there, he probably had to turn around and head
I
back.
know.
Right,
How long did
right.
it take you?
Yeah. 2 days or
Yeah, I was going to
two.
say.
Yeah. And I overstayed my leave. I had to ride a bus from San Diego to Cheyenne. And by the time I got back to Cheyenne, it was too late to get back to the ship.
Mm-hmm.
The ship was sailing New Year's Day. I knew that. So I was really in trouble because I was the only technician aboard ship. Oh, I missed that. Let's go back to where the ship went in commission at Todd Erie Basin in New York, Brooklyn. And I had been temporarily assigned to Pier 92 in New York, which is the receiving ship. And I soon found out that was an unhappy place. Everybody was being put on report for having their shirt buttoned or shirt unbuttoned or some minor infraction. Anyway,
Mm-hmm.
so I heard that I could live on the economy if I had permission from my commanding officer. So I took a taxi across New York to Brooklyn and went aboard ship, and the executive officer, which was a lemon, he said, I suppose you want to get out of the pier? And I said, well, yes, sir, I would like to get out of the pier. He said, well, all right. We'll sign the papers. So that meant I could leave the receiving ship and move into a hotel.
Mm-hmm.
And I stayed at the rest of the time at the Navy YMCA because that was where all the sailors were staying. And so they introduced me to this comm officer, which was going to be the officer I was going to report to. I had to report to 3 officers, a comm officer, a radio officer, and a radar officer. And the comm officer said, would you like to see the equipment? And I said, well, yes, sir, I'd like that. So he took me all over the ship and showed me all the radio transmitters and receivers and the radar. And we had some sonar and direction finders. And we were back on a fantail where the emergency radio shack was and climbing a ladder. I said, sir, has any of the other technicians reported aboard? He stopped and looked down. He said, son, you are the technician. And that was the first time I had known I was going to be in charge of millions of dollars worth of equipment that I'd never seen before.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway,
And what was the name of that first ship?
USS DuPage, D-U-P-A-G-E.
Gotcha.
It's named after DuPage County in Illinois. And so anyway, I stayed at the Navy YMCA until the admiral come over to commission the ship. And so the executive officer, which I didn't like, come back and give me a list of frequencies that I had to have transmitters and had to have receivers on and so forth and so on. And so I started, and I couldn't have done anything ahead of time. The ship was dead until that morning because there was no power. So the day we went in commission was the first time they fired up the boilers and had electricity. So I tried to tune the transmitter. I knew how. Sure. You set the freak meter over here for a frequency that's a multiple of what you want over here. And then you get a headset and plug it in, and you tune the transmitter till you get a beat. Then you're on frequency. I tried. Nothing. So I tried another transmitter. Nothing. So I was panicking by that time because we were gonna have to get underway because they wanted to bring in the Appalachian to our pier. And so finally I went to the comm officer. I said, this thing ain't working. And he said, well, I'll call the New York Navy Yard and get the guy over here that hooked all this stuff up. And so he come over, rushed over, come up to Radio Shack, said, what's the matter, son? I said, I can't get a beat between the freak meter and the transmitter. He said, well, what are you doing? I said, well, I set up freak meter and come over here and plug in. He said, don't you see that little box up there about 5 inches by 5 inches? He said, you've got to plug the freak meter into the transmitter. Simplest thing in the world. I plugged it in. Everything was fine. Anyway, got everything on frequency. But then that night, the comms officer called me in. By the way, when I graduated from Treasure Island, they promoted me to second-class radio tech. So the comm officer called me in and said, Harold, you are senior petty officer in the division. He said, as such, you're in charge of all the radiomen and radarmen. I hadn't been in charge of it. Nothing.
Oh, since you were the gang master or whatever it was.
Gang leader.
Gang leader.
Gang leader. But I sure didn't know how to run a division of radiomen and radarmen. Anyway, that was only for one day. And then the next day, the first-class radioman showed up, and he took the radioman. I had the radarman. It was an interesting life.
We're going to go for about another, 15 more minutes. So I'm going to probably come back in 2 weeks, and you guys are welcome to come or not.
Yeah.
What questions, and we'll kind of pick up from there, but any questions, I want you guys to, if you got any questions or anything real quick before we leave that we might not be back next time or whatever else, or because the lives are crazy and hectic. Is there anything late or for or...
Well, it sounds like we're getting ready to go into the war.
And that's
So
going to be a big section.
Yeah, so I'm trying to think of anything before that we didn't cover.
So, a couple of things, well, since everyone's here. Not too long ago, probably about 2-3 years ago. You guys don't know what I'm talking about, so I'm looking at you and you're like, well, I don't know. But Steve, Aunt Susan, and Aunt Nancy all of a sudden brought up this kind of story where they were in Europe, and they were on a base of some sort, and this guy started chasing them and finds out.
Okay, come on, wait.
Okay,
First off,
go ahead.
You got to wait on that story because this is all pre any of them being
alive. Well, I know. That's why I'm kind of
This is a little extra. This is
a little extra, but I wanted to make sure.
This is after the credits.
Okay.
Okay, so 2 weeks from now I'm going to come back and we're going to continue with all this. But while they're here, did you know anything about this story when they were?
No.
They were saying that they were being chased.
They were being chased by somebody.
We
Okay.
think they made the story up.
We have a feeling they made that story up.
What were the details? What were they doing? I can't remember.
They were in some park. It was in Germany.
Right, and here was Ramstein Air Base. Over here was Ramstein Village, and we lived in Ramstein Village. And so there was a shortcut that went through the woods.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's what they're talking
Never
about.
go
And
through the
they-
woods.
They went through the woods and they run onto this guy that
So you do remember?
I remember.
Do you think they were just
Vaguely.
kids being kids, or was it a real threat?
I don't know. At the time, it seemed very real.
Okay, well then that's good. That's good. What else? You got anything else? I know it's kind of hard to just skip from and everything else. So in 2 weeks I'll be back, and we're going to continue on with this. So think about the stories you're going to tell us in starting up from where we picked up.
I don't think you ever told me about the. You said earlier that you had taken some sort of welding course.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I don't think you had ever told me about that one. I didn't know you knew how to weld.
I probably don't know now.
Well,
This was a part of the
60 years ago, 70 years ago.
preparation to get ready for World War II. They needed welders, and there was all kinds of situations.
Yeah.
I remember when I was a senior in high school, the government passed a help students, and you had 12 hours a month at 25 cents an hour.
Mm-hmm.
So you got $3 a month if you put in the 12 hours.
You took correspondence course. Is that what you're saying?
No, it was just
Just go learn. Okay,
working for the school.
gotcha.
So the coach came to me and said, "Harold, do you mind hauling a load of sheep manure for the lawn?" I said, "No, I don't mind." He said, "Well, if you do that, I'll give you the 12 hours that you got coming." So I went and got a load of sheep manure and got paid $3 for it.
It's crazy. Okay, well thank you, Grandpa, so much for letting
Well,
us.
you're welcome, man.
And we'll be back in 2 weeks. Keep thinking about stories. So, okay,
Okay.
call that a day, everyone. Thank
think
you
we're
guys
good.
so much.